Russ Ewart calling this Germantown School District Teaching and Learning Committee meeting to order on May 15th at 5:18 p.m. Item number 2 is roll call. Mr. Tracy Pollock?
Here.
Ms. Kim Higginbotham?
Here.
Russ Ewart here. Agenda item number 3, agenda revisions and approval.
Move to approve the agenda.
Second.
Tracy with the motion to approve and Kim with the second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Item number 4, approval of April 10th, 2023 committee meeting minutes.
Recommendation to approve the pilot. Oh no, sorry, you go.
I move to approve the April 10th, 2023 committee meeting minutes.
I second.
Tracy with the motion of approval, Kim with the second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Item 5, consent review and discussion. We have none. Item 6, reports and updates. We have none. Item 7, unfinished business. We have none. Item 8, we have something. New business. Fall 23 reading pilot program. Mr. Jake Niziak has the floor.
All right, so at the last Teaching and Learning Committee, I had mentioned that there were several resources that we were looking at in terms of interest from the Reading Review Committee. We've spent multiple months looking at several resources. It culminated with a day where, or half a day where the Reading Review Committee took an in-depth dive into all of them and had a debate and discussion around the strengths and weaknesses of each one of those. So from all of the resources that we looked at, it was narrowed to 3 primary resources that we would like to take a look at next fall. So the 3 that the Reading Review Committee was most in favor of were the resources from Super Kids, HMH Into Reading, and then Wonders. And then in the agenda there are links to all 3 of the the overviews from each one of those resources. Each one of them also has some information for parents on there. Super Kids, one of the things that the review committee appreciated most about it was its adherence to the science of reading and its concern with phonemic awareness, phonics, fluency, vocabulary, and comprehension. Another huge benefit to Super Kids is there are Tier 2 supports that are built into it. So as in previous teaching and learning committees, when we talk about the multi-tiers of support that our students receive while they're in school, the Tier 2 element of our response to intervention is built into Super Kids so that kids can be supported in the classroom and it's built in for them. HMH Into Reading, one of the things that teachers liked best about that was the amount of authentic texts that were in HMH. There is a similarity in terms of structure between what our teachers currently use and HMH. So one of the things that a lot of our reading teachers use are centers, and HMH is kind of designed that way that there are multiple centers that kids can go to. They also thought that in terms of an implementation, it's one of the ones that has a very clear outline for teachers in terms of, on a daily basis, what are the lessons look like, what are we expecting from kids, what are the outcomes, what are the potential ways that we can support kids when they need that additional support. And then the last one was Wonders. That's a product by McGraw-Hill. Again, same thing with HMH too. I should have mentioned that HMH, you'll see things on their website about the science of reading. Again, Wonders is another one where they start talking about how it adheres to the core components of the science of reading. Same thing with HMH. They talked about the amount of authentic text that kids are exposed to. One of the other things that they really appreciated with Wonders is it's split between fiction and nonfiction texts. So when we talk about one of the core components of developing solid readers, it's this building of knowledge that kids get, and Wonders has multiple opportunities for kids to knowledge build with nonfiction texts. And then another piece that they really enjoyed about Wonders was the differentiation for students who might need something different. There's still a very similar look to it. So when students are getting lots of different things, there's not a real easy way for students to feel like they're getting texts that are different from their peers. This kind of helps build their own efficacy that, that they're not significantly different in any way, shape, or form, that they're just all getting different text to read. So those are the highlights of those 3 companies. companies and what our teachers believed as they started digging into the resources. So from there, we would like to pilot those 3 resources next fall, kicking off in September. In the plan, I've listed kind of a timeline for what we would go about, but I'm happy to field questions along the way. And I'll keep right on going.
Yeah, oh, yeah, sorry, go ahead.
That's fine.
I think,
So major objectives, clearly with 3 different resources, our goals are to identify what's the best resource for the students of Germantown. So while piloting, there are methods, and you can see in the evaluation section that we're gonna be looking for the strengths and weaknesses of those programs. All along the way, if you remember back to earlier teaching and learning committees, I referenced some of like here are the major things that we're looking for in our reading program. Exposure to increasingly complex text is something that we thought was very important. Authentic text was something that we thought was very important. Tier 2 interventions that are built right into the classroom, something that's important. So those are the things that along the way we're going to assess the effectiveness of each one of these resources to do the big things that we were looking for. Another thing that we're going to be looking for, and I've heard since my time joining Germantown, was making sure that we have some consistency in terms of our curriculums. So one of the things that we want to look for is the ease of implementation when we're talking about these curriculums. If the curriculum is exceedingly complex or difficult for our teachers to use with fidelity on a daily basis, that's going to be something that we're going to have concerns about, because the difficulty of implementation is going to result in inconsistencies in our classroom. And then in addition to that, you'll see one of our major objectives is to make sure that we're gathering feedback from all the primary stakeholders, including teachers, parents, and students. And we have different methods to do that are embedded in the timeline and then in our evaluation methods. In terms of classroom coverage, I included in here minimums. One of the reasons why I put minimums in here is I think this is like the bare minimum number of classrooms that we would need to make sure that we have adequate coverage and a good look at each one of these resources. As the pilot plan hasn't been approved, I haven't worked with all the companies on their finances. There are costs that are associated with each one of these, so I would not want to take the cost to a point where it becomes wasting resources. We want to make sure that we're looking at each one of the reading resources in an effective way, but then not to spend an exorbitant amount of funds to do that. Embedded in the way that we would cover, we would make sure that we have classrooms at each one of the buildings that are piloting each one of these curriculums, and then same thing, we want multiple grade levels piloting each one of the resources. You'll notice that there's a little bit difference in the balance of them. Super Kids, again, is just a K2 curriculum, so there's not a 3-5 offering from that company. So in terms of a pilot timeline, each one of the companies has professional development that's associated with it. Almost all of that is free, and they want to make sure that you're implementing the program in the way that it was intended. So that all would happen in August, where the companies either offer a virtual option or they will send somebody on site to work with the teachers who are going to pilot the curriculum to make sure that there aren't any questions that they have. Almost all of the companies also offer like some form of check-ins along the way. So there are on-site coaches that some of them offer, so they'll come into the classrooms, they'll take a look at the implementation, and then they'll give you feedback. They also offer professional development to our principals, so that our principals are equipped to go into the classrooms and look for like the key elements of the program to make sure that it's being implemented effectively. We could also loop in our reading specialists into that, because they go into classrooms and work with teachers, so that we'll have multiple sets of eyes on the curriculum in addition to the teachers that are using them. The other piece that will happen in August is we'll start to look at the resources and the assessments that are embedded in them. Reading assessments often will cross resources, so what you're asking the student to do may not be resource specific, and those offer us opportunities to take a look at how students are performing in each one of them. So we would pull an assessment from one of the resources and use it across to see how our students are performing. So an example of that would be within a nonfiction text, we're asking comprehension questions. We would apply that same type of assessment across to see how well our students are performing. So any opportunities that we have to collect some data on student performance, we're gonna take an opportunity to do that. One of the cautions that I would throw at that is we're measuring reading, and reading is one of these skills that develops over time. Not that I don't anticipate that we'll see growth in our students over that short amount of time, but it's one of those things that it's a caution that we will have because it's such a small time sampling. In September, we'll pre-test our students to find out their baseline level of performance. We have some internal data that we'll be able to pull from MAP, so that we'll be able to take a look at distributions of students. So our students who typically demonstrate high growth and high achievement, we might look at how each one of those groups performs with each one of the resources that we're piloting. Along the way, we'll collect feedback from teachers, and then the other thing that we'll do is we'll continually have principals as well as myself. I'm sure Dr. Reuter is going to want to participate in these as well, popping into classrooms so that we can take a look at the resources in use with our kids. In October, we're going to continue collecting assessment data from our kids. The reading review team will come together again so that we can start to discuss some of the strengths and the weaknesses that we're already seeing in those curriculums. One of the things that we would want to do there is then reach out to each one of those curriculum companies to say, here are the things that we're noticing are going well, here are some of the things that we're struggling with, to see if it's an implementation piece on our end, or if they have like some ideas for support into how to address that. The company's ability to respond to our needs is another thing that we'll assess along the way to make sure that the support is there, to make sure that once we have the curriculum that we're able to implement it in an effective way. In November, we're going to start collecting information from parents. So we'll survey parents in terms of their reaction to the resource, how their students are responding to it, any additional feedback that they want to provide to us, in addition to some of the reading materials that they're going to see coming home with them, so that they have an opportunity to read with their students and see the text that they're exposed to on a daily basis. And then at the end of November, again, we're going to kind of measure the growth of our students while they were in the pilot to see what achievement data that we can collect from them, as well as start to narrow down what we would like to recommend to the board in terms of the resource that we would like to use. So in December, we're going to collect all of the data that we have. So we're going to collect the feedback data that we have from students, parents, teachers. We're going to look at the achievement data. We're going to look at the data that's going to be collected by our principals along the way through walkthroughs and protocols. Protocols are often offered up by the company, so they're saying here are key look-fors when you go into classrooms. So we'll be able to create one that'll go across all three of the resources so that they're using a common tool when they go in and look. So that common tool for the look-fors is going to contain both here are things that we have as priorities that we're looking for, and then any additional indicators that each one of the companies might say, here's a key element for implementation of this curriculum. And the recommendation for the curriculum will come to the Teaching and Learning Committee in December, and then the full board in December. Questions on timeline?
Timeline is good. The only question I have would be a list of the actual resources or books that will be used for the curriculum and for the pilot.
Yep, so that I can get you. One of the challenges with HMH and Wonders is going to be that they have an enormous catalog of texts. So we have the opportunity to select from that enormous catalog the books that we would like to purchase. So it's, I look at it as a positive thing, because we have a lot of control over the books that we can select and then bring in, because there's lots of books that you can use to achieve the same educational outcome.
Mm-hmm.
For the pilot, there's you get a little bit scaled down version of it, because often those materials are provided to you free of cost, so they're providing you with a sampling of some of the resources that would be used. But that would be something that would be one of our next big tasks for the reading review team, and then we would share that information with the board. Here are all the selected titles that we'd be looking at that HMH, Wonders, or Super Kids provides. Super Kids is a much smaller program. Again, it's a K2 reading program, so you can imagine the breadth of text that's available. K2 is not quite as expensive as it is 3.5. Super Kids actually has stories that are written about the Super Kids, hence the name of the program. So it's them following, you know, in very age-appropriate stories about, you know, losing a dog or something to that effect, where it's following a particular path of a super kid, and those super kids then develop K1, 2. Super Kids does spin in nonfiction text too, so they have a balance of fiction and nonfiction in Super Kids. But the texts that are available within that program is far easier to explain and provide. Here are the ones that we have, because the other two have so many options that we have that we could go with.
Well, and their website gave a description kind of each of the 14 kids that you could go
Yep,
through
yep,
and see
super
what they're all
efficient.
about. Mhm.
Yeah.
Because the sampling, I guess, of the books for HMH and Wonders, it should give a pretty, if you can get the list of the
Mhm.
books, so that,
Yep.
I know even if you can't get the whole one, but it'll give you a good idea of what they are, consider important books or ones that they would encourage, obviously.
Yep. I can provide the overall catalogs that we have to choose from for both
Mhm.
of those, so that
That'd
you
be
can
great.
see the full breadth of text that we have available.
And in doing the Super Kids, because that only goes from K through 2, and we're talking about, you know, trying to get something, what would be the benefit of going with that program, and where would we go after that?
Sure. So, in all likelihood, HMH and Wonders would be one of the two that we would go with next. So HMH and Wonders offer a K5 sequence.
Mhm.
We just wouldn't be using their K2 piece of it.
Mhm.
Forecasting where we might go next, both HMH and Wonders, they come from, Wonders is from McGraw-Hill. Both of them have middle school offerings, so this was a K8 review. The 6-8 team is just a little bit behind the K5 team. Two of the resources that they are looking at are HMH, it's called Interliterature, and then the McGraw-Hill one's called StudySync. Those are right now the two leading candidates from them. They're still looking at some additional resources, but both of those could then create a K2 and then a 3-8 progression. The benefit to Super Kids, and you'll read this in their information, they've really narrowed it in to say, what are the skills that students need to develop to learn how to read? I always flip this, because then they said, once you get to 3-5, now they're going to read to learn. So the intent of Super Kids is that they wanted to narrow their scope so much so that they could heavily concentrate on what are the skills that we need to develop in our youngest readers to make sure that they become effective readers by grade 3. So that's their niche, and they want to make sure that they focus in on that, and they said they don't want to deviate from it, because they said this is what they do and this is what they do well, and that's why they want to focus on that crew. So with our reading review committee, I initially started saying, because we want a more consistent system, I'm going to have a hard time looking at a resource that's going to be different for K2, 3, 5, and 6, 8. As we learned more and more about reading and knowing what we know about kids, your K2 readers are different than your 3, 5 readers, and your 6, 8 readers are different than your 3, 5. So considering programs that best meet the needs of our kids became the top priority of saying, what's the best program that we can get for our K2 readers, and if after K2 we've got kids to the point that they're reading, Super Kids will tell you, you can put them in any program and they're going to be great readers. But that's the idea, is we're targeting each one of those grade levels to make sure that we're providing them with the best possible resource for them to use to learn how to read and develop their reading skills. HMH and Wonders will both be piloted at the K2 level, so we'll get to see how they support our youngest readers too.
So Super Kids doesn't give any kind of advice, or like this would lead to, this program would work best as a continuation of
Yep,
what
so
they've done?
they don't. There's one company that is endorsed by Super Kids that says this is a good next step. The reading review team looked at it and did not find that it was comprehensive enough to support our kids. So we did look at it, and it was one of the resources that we looked at. It's called Reading Side by Side. And it was one that they chose not to go with.
Do you have a list of all of the curriculums that you guys looked at also, so
Yep.
that we could?
Yep, I can share that with you. It was in, just for the people who are listening at home, the last teaching and learning agenda. In the background, I listed all of the ones that we looked at.
Benchmark, Super Kids, Wonders, HMH into reading, Reading Side by Side, and Being a Reader were the ones that were on that list.
There were also, so this is a asterisk to that, the full team didn't look at a couple of resources because they didn't believe that they would, so they began to explore, they didn't take it to the finalist stage, so there were other ones that we eliminated along the way. If you wanna know all of the ones that we looked at, but there were some that we quickly dismissed as they wouldn't be a good fit.
What was the main criteria that you guys used as far as, I know the tier, having that tier 2, and can you, authentic texts, what could you define that?
So the first question that you asked, so when you think about authentic text, so we're looking for high quality literature. So when you look at things like anthologies and things like that, sometimes they piece it apart and you just get a little snippet of the story. What our teachers were looking for were students to be exposed to some of the books that they could go to the library and check out. So sometimes they're called trade books and things like that. So it's looking at books that third graders are really going to want to read. So it's looking at high interest text for kids, both in nonfiction and fiction. So you could think of like nonfiction topics that kids are very much interested in. Those are the same things that they're looking for in terms of what these reading programs are. So if the core texts for the programs are high interest for kids, they're going to start building the love of reading because that's another important component. When we talk about like what are the main things that our teachers were looking for, I would say a huge piece of it was the core elements of the science of reading. The biggest one, because they've seen gains in some of the phonics programs that we've had. We use Hagerty and Sonde, and we've seen good gains with both of them, but our teachers will tell you that what they're looking for is a more systematic and comprehensive approach to developing the key components of reading, and that was one of the things that they looked for in each one of the programs was, does this develop our students' ability to read? And then the second piece of it, does it also support their love of reading? So are they getting texts in their hands that they're going to want to pick up, take home, have book clubs with, and talk to their friends about? The last section that I shared was the evaluation methods. So I kind of pieced these in along the way, but I just want to clarify if there are any questions. So pre and post assessments for our students to measure their overall growth and achievement. Formative assessments are kind of the quick hitting assessments that are already built into the curriculums. So they often, the quick checks to just check for comprehension and check for fluency. So there are ways that those things are built into each one of the curriculums, and we would utilize the assessments that are built in, because that would give us a good idea of how the students are responding to that curriculum. Observations, those are going to be conducted by both myself and then all of our principals, as well as getting teachers on the review team into each other's classrooms. So just because I'm piloting a resource, I'm going to have my own perspective on it, getting them into the classroom. So if I'm piloting HMH, I want to get that teacher into a room that's also piloting Wonders so that they can talk to each other and then see that. There's obviously going to be opportunities that are going to be built into the reading review team's discussions about it, but I want them to see it live in action with kids. We'll have surveys. I put focus groups on there because often focus groups work a little bit better with our youngest readers. So asking our kindergartners what parts of the program are their favorite, that's going to come off a lot better than trying to get them to take a survey. So that's the idea behind a focus group, is we'll pull small groups of kids together and talk to them about what are the things that they like the most about the program. Is there anything they don't like? Were there activities that they particularly enjoyed? Just so that we can get some information on their experience, and then I can share that with the Teaching and Learning Committee, and I'll be able to share that with the board, because obviously we want to hear our students' thoughts on how they're responding to the curriculum. And then the last piece up there is student work samples, so then we can see Within each one of these reading programs, there's lots of opportunities for students to write in response to text. So that would be another thing that I think might be important for the Teaching and Learning Committee to see, as well as in a full board presentation of here are some of the things that our students have done with these programs.
I think one of the things that may be interesting for us in addition to that is also, because obviously we're looking for improvement in what we offer. And obviously one or two in theory could rise to the top, but I think it would be interesting to also identify the benefits from what we currently have to this, and also honestly any of the challenges that might pop up, because obviously any sort of change, it's never smooth. There's always going to be bumps in the road. So I think that would be beneficial for us to understand, as well as, this program rose to the top because of XYZ, and here's how it compares to what we have now. And inevitably other benefits may come out of that, and like I said, other challenges as well. So that'd be something I'd be interested in when we've gotten to that point.
So how many classrooms will be keeping what they were currently doing?
So if you look at that table,
Yeah.
again, we've had some additional interest beyond the reading review team. So the idea is to try and expand it a little bit so that we have better coverage. Because to Mr. Pollock's point, one of the things that would be necessary to make sure that we have an effective implementation, especially when you talk about the difficulties of change, is that our teachers are excited about the resource that's there. And I can tell you that the reading review team is exceptionally excited to have a resource in their hand that they think is more comprehensive than what we have. All three of these resources were number 1 or number 2 for our teachers in terms of interest in pilot. So they want these resources and they're excited about all of them. So when I force them to say, what's your second one in the pilot, some of them struggled because they like all of them. So in terms of minimum, all of the teachers who are on the reading review team would get the opportunity to pilot. I can tell you exactly how many that is. So for the minimum number that we would have in terms of piloting, the absolute minimum would be 13, so that would be every teacher that was on the review team. The idea then is to expand it a little bit so that we can increase the level of not only our ability to see these in action, but also build some of the excitement around the curriculum so that there is buy-in. Because if we've got teachers who are out there who are championing the resource and saying this is what it's done for our students, that's going to give us the best bet in terms of implementation, because then we'll be able to start building their capacity to be internal leaders for supporting this as we roll it out to our entire K-8 staff, in this case K-5 staff. The reason why I only put minimums up there is because we're still at this phase where I'm waiting for the board to approve the pilot plan. If there was a reason why you'd want to impose like certain numbers of classrooms that I would use, I would certainly stick by that. There are costs that are associated with some of them. Again, full transparency, Super Kids is the most expensive one to pilot, whereas HMH and Wonders are both relatively cheap to pilot. So expanding the number of classrooms that could use those two, it's really easy to do because there's not a significant cost that's associated with them.
What is most expensive and what is reasonably cheap?
Um,
For a ballpark.
Depends on who you're asking.
Some of them
Could be
are-
a test.
Some of them are nearly free to, some of them are nearly free to implement, and some of them can be a couple $1,000s per classroom.
So what are we looking at, a budget or potential?
I can bring that back if it was to exceed the $15,000 mark. One of the things that happens is when you talk to companies, the first number that they give you isn't always the final number, and these companies are very interested in working with you. So I have initial numbers, but then I don't believe that that's the final
Well,
number.
they're in a sales phase, right?
Yep.
And they're looking for long-term,
Mm-hmm.
which is where they're going to make their money.
If it was to the point where it was going to exceed 15,000, I would obviously bring that to the finance committee. I don't anticipate that any of them would get to that level, but I can certainly share that.
So projecting forward though, as we move through the pilot program of some sort, potentially one of these or two or maybe three of these are gonna be picked for certain grades, right? Cost of operation at that point?
I can give you the exact figures on what that would look like, because those are things, again, we're still in the initial discussions of those. Right now, we're looking at using ESSER funding for whatever curriculum that we go through. So Brittany has allocated money for each one of, the reading curriculum within ESSER dollars.
So how,
To,
well, for the ESSER side of it, I mean, that's good and well. We have till 2024 to spend that. But it can only be used on one-time fees. I'm sure there's reoccurring costs with this.
Yep, so, each one of them, and I can, if that's another piece of information that would be helpful, it would be included in the initial proposal to the board, but I can give that to you even sooner. It gets a little complicated. One, you're basically paying for the consumable piece year to year, so each one of them will tell you what that is. The other pieces, almost all of them offer you different breaks after a certain amount. So if you want to invest in a curriculum for 3 years, 4 years, or 5 years, you don't pay the same amount for the curriculum.
Mm-hmm.
The second piece of that is, especially for like Wonders and HMH into reading, when we look at grades 3, 4, and 5, part of the cost that is associated with them is the amount of actual text that we provide to kids, so the physical paper versions versus what they have access to online. So each one of them has that component to it. Well, sorry, Wonders and HMH into reading have that component to it, where some of the texts that students could have are available online. Our teachers are very much in favor of our students having the actual book.
So are our parents.
Yeah.
They want to be able to see that come home.
Yeah, but it's a twofold. So it's how much of the text do we purchase there, because we know that they also still have access to a library of resources online.
I think another way to maybe think about it is we obviously have some cost currently. So
Yeah,
if there's
I-
some perspective as far
I
as,
understand. The point, what I'm getting at and trying to get ahead of is we're going to pilot this. There's going to be teacher buy-in in one way or the other at some point on this. And I would like to know the price tag before that, not after that. Because if we have to undo that buy-in, right, we can
Yep.
expect that to be an extraordinary.
and it,
Yeah, I think what Jay can share with you is a startup cost fee. Any new implementation of curriculum startup cost is going to be look big.
Oh,
But then
yeah.
it's the
Yeah.
ongoing that'll be built into the teaching and learning, and we're fortunate because of the way we've utilized ESSER dollars. We're utilizing it the way they should be,
Mhm.
and we've bookmarked money knowing that a reading curriculum is essential to the school district's success moving forward, that we have that startup cost set aside, and then it's just being fiscally responsible long term with those year after year. But
think-
I agree, like seeing what that startup is and then what does that look like down the road.
And I think that's fine, because I think getting the perspective of it costs us X amount of dollars now, but we have this up and running, it's going to cost us X plus 10 or whatever it is. That gives us that ongoing perspective. And as soon as I heard ESSER dollars, of course, that's the one-time cost. But to Dr. Reuter's point, if our normal costs are $10,000 a year, just to throw out a number, but the startup is 50, but we have the 50 to cover it, and going forward it's 10 plus whatever. It's shocking at first. It's concerning because one-time cost, but then, well, in reality, it's the price inflation is just a little bit more that Brittany has to worry about, really. And you,
And some of the tertiary things that we're supporting a unique reading curriculum at the point in time right now at our elementaries, that there's a lot of things going on, those dissipate, and then we're focused on a bottom line budget piece year after year that's more sustainable for fiscal responsibility.
so you talked a little bit about how you're going to gather teacher feedback and the focus groups for the students, what would parent feedback potentially look like, or at least an example or two look
Sure.
like?
One of the ways that we can do that is surveys to parents. So that's an easy way to collect data from all of the classrooms where it's being implemented. So some of the things you can just ask general satisfaction type things. So most of our parents, especially in the upper grades, have had an experience with our current reading curriculum and the curriculum that's coming home. So one of the pieces of feedback to your point earlier is what are the differences that you've noticed? And another piece of that is kind of measuring their own students' engagement in reading. Have they noticed anything different in this year, in the short amount of time that they've been exposed to Wonders, HMH? Have they noticed anything that's different? Do they see any differences in excitement in terms of their student, their excitement for reading? If there's been any kind of attitude shift. I can tell you my little reader at home is not excited about his reading curriculum, and it's very clear to me that he's not. They're also switching their reading curriculum next
It's
year.
bad
so
parenting.
I'm very excited about it. I take a lot of ownership for that. So, but that's part of it. Is I know something about the readers that he's bringing home and how much he wants to engage with those versus the books that he was typically exposed to. So I think as parents, they offer a unique perspective on how their student is reacting to that program and their level of engagement. But the other thing is, asking some of those open-ended type questions. Just give us the general feedback of what you've noticed about the reading program so far. Are you happy with the books that are coming home? Have you had an opportunity to read those books with your student? Has your student talked to you about the text that they're reading? I know that sometimes when students hit 5th grade, 6th, 7, they don't really want to talk to their parents all that much, so they might not share that information outright. But if we put that into a survey, it might prompt a parent to ask a couple questions and see what their student experience has been like.
Yeah, I think a key is going to be making the parents aware as we hit this.
But that actually is gonna lead to what the
So-
next question is,
Yep.
opt-in, opt-out of the piloting process.
So in opt-in and opt-out, one of the things that we would have to do is a change of teacher. So to opt out of it, that would be, a class list type thing where the student would have to move to a different classroom. So we could make parents aware of that in the beginning. The other piece of that is in the timeline you'll notice in August, and I'm sorry that I missed this, but there is the initial, maybe it's in September, but there is that initial communication to parents, September, communication of parents, letting them know that this pilot's being used, the reason why we're doing it, here are the resources, we'll give them specific information about the parent portals for any one of the programs that they're going to have, but we'll let parents know right on the front end that your student's classroom has been selected as a pilot classroom. Here's why we're doing it, here's the benefit, and their partnership with us, that we want to make sure that we're collecting feedback from them along the way so they can be fully aware of the process they're a part of.
Are there any surrounding districts using any of these curriculums already that you would be able to kind of see what their reading scores?
Yep. So Slinger and McWanago are two that are using Super Kids. HMH and Wonders, there's a long list of schools that are using those, so I can provide those too. There's also multiple districts that are just adopting both of those, so there are a lot of school districts that are in our shoes that are switching reading curriculums to those two. I think they might also be in the same boat of using ESSER dollars to switch. But I can let you know who's recently adopting and who's currently using. Some of them are only in year 1 or 2 of implementation, so it's tough to see full impact when they're that new.
Right. But it'd be interesting to see if there was any sort of.
Yeah, I can share a website with you that it's high quality teaching resources for Wisconsin, and from there you can narrow and see what everybody is using. So you can click on Wonders and you can see all the schools within CISA 1 that are using them. Same thing.
That'd be great. I know kind of in preparation for this, you shared access, a little more in-depth access to HMH and Wonders. We were able to kind of go in and explore some of that. I hope everyone here did that. obviously, if we keep moving forward with this, that should get pushed to the remaining members, to allow them some time to explore. I do appreciate kind of when I initially looked over this pilot and the whole process behind it, the data collection points that were established throughout it and kind of the variety of it. So we have some actual data to use on the back end when we're making a final decision. That's definitely an improvement over our last run at some of this where we're kind of in a tough situation of making some decisions and we don't have those data points that might be able to push us one way or the other on it. So I can appreciate that greatly as we move forward. And you kind of explained the process of picking and how they narrowed down to these three. I'm wondering if beyond the programs they were offering, what type of research or weight was given into the companies themselves, as well as kind of what they do publishing-wise, bringing to the table beyond this specific program.
I don't think on our teacher side there was much weight at all in terms of this is McGraw-Hill. I don't think that was one of the determining factors. When you looked at how teachers engaged with each one of the materials, I don't think there was a preference for one company over the other. It was really about what are the kind of books that our kids are reading, what are the kind of things that their students being asked to do. I can tell you, like, one of the curriculums or resources that was eliminated, you know, the teacher opened it up and it is a popular name in terms of a reading resource. She opened it up and she's like, it looks like there's a lot of busy work that our kindergartners are going to be able to do. And, you know, that was a huge turnoff for her, that when she looked at this, she's like, well, I really want students to be able to engage in high quality reading. Even our kindergartners, they need solid read aloud so that they can be excited in reading, and what are the tasks that we're asking them to do, and they want them to engage in meaningful work on a daily basis. And if the resource wasn't offering that, they weren't interested in it, and it didn't matter the name of it as much as what was inside.
So our goal would be to just choose one, which would be impossible if we liked the Super Kids, correct? So are we prepared to, as far as making that commitment to having to do things?
Do you want to explain, Jake, then the aspect of resource versus our control around development of curriculum?
So the similar conversation that we had when we talked about health and then when we talked about math, one of the things that I've already shared was the K-8 priority standards. So an evaluation of the reading standards on the K-8 level and what's prioritized in each one of the grade levels. So we still have control over the curriculum. So in each one of the stages, we're identifying the key learning outcomes for stage 1 of UBD. So what do we want students to learn in Unit 1 of kindergarten? And that's the part that we still have control over. And then in addition to that, we have control over how it's going to be assessed. So to the point of, and I did, you don't want to throw away lots of parts, because to Russ's point, the resources are expensive. So there were elements of certain curriculums that didn't align to our priority standards. So there was one curriculum that said kids should do 20 minutes of vocabulary work every single day. And our teachers said that's just, we don't feasibly have 20 minutes every single day that they're just going to focus solely on vocabulary. And I reminded teachers that when we prioritize standards, part of that is looking at the resource too. That would be an element of the resource that, albeit we're not going to ignore completely, but we wouldn't be doing it on a 20-minute a day basis because that wasn't aligned to the goals that we had. Same thing in stage 2 when we assess students, we're identifying the goals that we have that are aligned to the standards, Then we're gonna identify the assessments either within, and it's almost always within, the resource that are aligned to those goals that we're looking to measure. And then the last piece of it is the learning plan. So in stage 3, we're often identifying, you know, we're gonna offer students these 5 different texts because they fit with the genre study that we're doing, or they meet the educational goals that we're looking for, but we've identified the texts that are gonna be used alongside of that unit. So when we're offered with, you know, 300 books that we get to choose from, we're narrowing it down to say, here are the 5 that we're gonna associate with this particular unit. So the UBD side of that, the design element that we have control over, would articulate the key pieces of the resources that we were using, but it also narrows both HMH and Wonders. Part of being a comprehensive literacy program is they got everything. So it's they have more resources that you could. I mean, if we just taught reading from the start of the school day to the end of the school day, maybe we could use all the things that they have. But part of it is us identifying what are the key elements of that resource that are aligned to our learning goals and the outcomes that we're looking for kids.
So HMH I have pulled up, and one thing that initially drew my attention is HMH into reading scope and sequence. View the scope and sequence of this program. Full program, foundational skills. Click those links. And as I begin to scroll through those, currently I'm at module 9 of what is the tip of the iceberg, but every page starts with social emotional learning, responsible decision making, and then lists the text involved in that. Social emotional learning, social awareness, every module, 7, 8, 9, as I continue. So I got a little confused as I was given a link for a reading program, and I found myself embedded in a social emotional program. So am I looking at a reading program, or am I looking at social emotional learning embedded into, woven into our reading program?
So one of the things that each one of those programs, or HMH specifically, offers is that tied to students' social and emotional development. So they create links within the lessons. So within stories, often when we're talking about theme development, there can be a natural connection to that. Again, when we have control over it, it doesn't have to be the emphasis of the lesson. So even though that resource is there and that connection is there, that doesn't have to be the connection that our teachers are focused on. So again, when we talk about what's the learning goal for each one of these lessons, we establish that through understanding by design.
As I'm looking through this, though, I don't view it as an access point. I view it as a funnel to narrow the scope of what they're doing into that lane. So that's a concerning thing to me. Well, we have on the document started discussing our social emotional learning curriculum, if we want to call it that, our program, at a previous meeting. But as I see it embedded as much as I do in HMH, and I wanted to make sure I was at the right spot. That was actually the initial point of my questions. Did I click on something or have provided the wrong link? I don't think that's the case, considering I'd use a password and login to get to where I'm at. But it is pretty concerning to me that it's all encompassing in this, not, and I understand your explanation as to there could be links and we could eliminate or limit those to some degree, but what I'm seeing is it's firmly embedded in the program. Am I seeing this wrong, or am I?
It is a component that has been built into HMH, that there are connections to social and emotional learning that exist within lessons.
Is that the only one for the curriculum?
You're gonna find elements, so Super Kids might talk about it in terms of character development, but it would include like some of those connections there where maybe the Super Kids are working on cooperation, so they'll highlight that element of the story to talk about how did the Super Kids work together to solve X problem.
I was kind of hoping we were focusing on reading, but it's a little frustrating.
The core components for each one of those programs, I'm going to tell you, is developing literacy skills. And when you.
And I don't have a reason necessarily to disagree with you on that, but the way they present it, it seems as if they forgot it or made it secondary to a different objective and mission. And that is a concerning portion to me. Sitting here making a decision for an entire district who we have seen decreasing numbers in reading, and we're looking to focus on that. And we've already just started a discussion regarding our social emotional learning program in a different lane that would prefer to keep it in versus embedding it across all topics of learning, specific to the point where I see what it is in HMH, which is a highlight of the program, not secondary or tertiary to it. That's a concerning thing for me.
Okay.
I mean, is there a way, can we pull this up on here so people can see what I was talking about? I don't know if you'll have access to it or not.
I don't know that Chris has that link.
I mean, that's not to shoot down the entire program, I just,
Let's see if I can. Real quick.
You sending me a link?
Yeah, I'm just pulling it up. You should have that. Did you get it?
Mm-hmm. Just loading.
while we're waiting for that, back to the financial side of this. This is an opportunity for our district to kind of align some of our library spendings then, as this moves forward and potentially something's adopted here. You had made mention of referring to use text out of our libraries, that we can kind of make sure we're not duplicating expenditures there. And maybe instead of some of the stuff we are bringing into the libraries, we could concentrate on stuff that would align with one of these programs or these
Absolutely.
programs in
Yep.
general.
Yep.
To ensure we're getting that supportive text into our libraries
Yep.
based on our curriculum decisions.
For both, well, actually all three. In Super Kids in second grade, they start to go out into more of the actual readers, and they deviate from the stories about the Super Kids. But that would be an opportunity where we could, especially when students are offered choice within those, to have some of those other books available in the library.
Sure. So this is what I was paging through, and I got through, I think, module number 9 or 10, around that range. along with some others further down, but they basically look about this same way. Is there anything that I'm not picking up when I look at this? I mean, how is this used from our teaching staff or our school? Is this a sell sheet for them? Is this an explanation of what a lesson plan would look like?
That's
Can you give some
probably
context?
that's an overview. So you can see the essential questions. So that's very similar to understanding by design. So that's one of the questions that we focus a unit around. So you can say what makes a habitat a home. So in this case, it's probably a connection to science in this case. So you can see on, and I apologize, I'm not wearing my glasses. It's so much better. So you can see that, you know, they're working in their discussion groups to stay on topic, and then one of the things that they're looking for is how to classify and categorize. So they're going to build an animal habitat, so that kind of tells you where the whole unit is going. The essential thing that they're looking there is to synthesize. So when we read this nonfiction text, how do we put that text together? This must be a kindergarten or
Yes.
an early elementary because it's talking about a big book. So big books, if you remember those from your days or if you've been in one of our classrooms, they're actually big books. They're enormous texts that they read with students so that students can read aloud together. And then you can see the key literacy skills that they're working on under there. So comprehension, making predictions, what's the central idea, what's text features. So this is a nonfiction text, so one of the things that they're looking at are like headings, graphs, charts, things like that. So this gives you like a broad overview of what the lesson's focus is. So similar to understanding by design, you start with the end in mind, and you talk about what some of the big goals are. So we've not built the unit for this one, so that's week 3, so that's what they're doing for the entire week.
So in here, when I see the reading vocabulary side, it lists a title, a genre to it, and then a big book.
Yep.
So you got your read aloud book, your big book.
Yep.
Now, we could pick anything from their category to fill those 2 spots.
So the big books and the read alouds are probably going to be core to that lesson. So there's probably far less options there. If there was something that we, you know, this has happened before where there's a read aloud that, or like this one's not the best one for us, you could substitute something different in. With the big books, it's very unlikely that we're going to be able to get anything different than what the big book is from, you know, their choice text.
So then our ability to self-edit isn't.
With the big books, that's going to be limited on any curriculum that you go with because they only produce so many in that format. I can tell you that with HMH and with Wonders, I'm almost positive that we can self-select in terms of the books we purchase. So it may be one of those instances where instead of having if this is the direction we were going with and we found one that we didn't want to include, a teacher could use a normal book underneath like a document camera and then they could project it to the smart board and they could read the book that way. It's just a little less the tactile skills and the engagement that you get sometimes from using a big book, but you don't necessarily have to purchase all of them from those companies because both HMH and funders kind of let you do like an a la carte type approach and say I want to purchase these things.
And I know I'm focusing in on HMH, but that's just, they make the examples so easy to kind of understand, I guess. Fundamentally, when we're talking about tying stuff back to standards that we prioritize in reading, and we'll talk about social emotional learning and tying that curriculum back to things we prioritize in standards for that. How is that controlled with an overlay like this?
So when you look at the the right-hand side there, when you look at
9.
those pieces, I think that makes it fairly clear to the teacher what they're focusing in on. So when I look at the comprehension section there, one of the things that's built into that stage 1 is we talk about what's the acquisition of content and skills. So we identify the key things that we want students to take away from those lessons, and then our assessments are built on that. So in this lesson, you can see that one of the things that we're looking at are predictions, identifying central ideas, and key text features. So you can imagine that the assessment that we look at for those in stage 2 are going to be around checking predictions, identifying the central idea, and using text features. So when we look at that clearly articulates to the teacher what this week is being spent on in terms of reading skills. And this is again one of the things that our review team was looking at when they were identifying what resources to go with. When I talked to you about the fundamentals of the science of reading, what are the key components and what are the things we want students to be able to do, these are the things that they were looking at to say, does it have a focus in those areas in terms of developing the skills? Are the texts that our kids exposed to, are they decodable? Can they read with a level of fluency even at the K level so that they're able to identify a central idea of a story? Or are the texts that students are exposed to through read aloud engaging enough that students will listen and then be able to identify what the key idea is for that story?
So when we look at that though, that's what they're having the student pick up from the text or be able to utilize the text for, right?
Correct.
But when I see above, and I apologize, I'm on module 3, week 3, social emotional learning, social awareness. So while we're expecting them to take that from the text, how I look at this is the text is focused on expressing some sort of learning development around social awareness and social emotional learning, are presenting those skills through the text, and then they use their skills that they're building, in this case genre, identify story elements, right, of that text. So the text itself is bringing in social emotional awareness, or social emotional learning, in this case, particular one, social awareness, but then they're going to use their skills they're building to pick apart that text or learn from that text in these aspects, which that side of it I understand.
Yep, and I would say, to look at that, it might be useful to see some of the actual prompts that students might be asked or the stories that they're reading, so that you can.
Correct. I'm with you on that, and I understand that side, and that's how we're going to develop our learners. Here, my concerns are the text we're using to develop the learners. We could use any text, and multiple texts, some not solely focused on social emotional learning, could do those same things, and they could use the comprehension side of this to analyze that text that's painted in some other light, right?
And I would say for most text, there's going to be a connection that you're going to be able to draw to the major social emotional competencies. So when we talk about social awareness, it's all in the prompts and the questions that you're using. So
but when we're talking about a totality of this, right? Are we socially engineering the kids, or are we developing their reading skills?
I would say no, and I would say it's developing the reading skills. I'd say, so if we're talking about social awareness, even in some of the resources that aren't trying to highlight that they're talking about a social emotional competency, you would normally find a question, so when we're asking about comprehension in the story, how did the character feel? So this happened, what was their reaction? So some of the comprehension questions that they have, you could loosely tie to the competencies that they've highlighted above. So again, I think it might be useful to look at, and I don't think that would be the takeaway that you would have, that we were trying to teach the social emotional skill. It is connected to it.
No, but the argument I would make is we're inundating them with the social emotional skill outside of the scope that we're looking at in our district for social emotional learning.
If you look at the
and this is, like I said, we're specifically focused on this because this.
I think if you looked at the resource as well as the texts that are there, I don't know that that's there. I think what they're highlighting is that while you're teaching this text, you could include social emotional.
Right. If we delete this social emotional learning, social awareness sticker here, there's zero concept of that in reading and vocabulary down below. This is a consistent theme and now educational resource that we're going to stamp it with social emotional learning.
Right.
So I think to Mr. Miziak's point, there's not explicit instruction around social emotional learning. They're trying to say as a company, this also can meet your social emotional learning needs if that's the venue you want to go.
But I would take issue with a company that is
Yeah.
explicitly virtual signaling for sales
Well,
and their true intentions at some point. I understand exactly what you're saying. You very well could
It's the
strip
same thing that happened
strip this.
Common Core. Every curriculum that came out,
Mhm.
that was out,
Yeah,
they just put a stamp on it and said Common Core because
Yeah.
you can make a connection
And,
somewhere.
and I understand now that people are moving away from Common Core. All they do is remove the stamp, and nothing
yeah,
changes.
now we're non-Common
And
Core.
I take an issue with that too.
Right.
Well, on their website, and this, you talked about some of the help that these companies offer along the way. It says ready-made social and emotional learning PowerPoint lessons with guided notes to help teachers easily integrate SEL into daily instruction.
So part of HMH and Wonders would be that a la carte function to it. So it's what are the resources that you're focusing on. So when you look at, similar to one of the things that we've been asked for is to take a look at our social emotional curriculum. What they're saying is you don't have to buy a standalone curriculum and do this as an add-on to something else. That you could ask students to focus on this element while they're also working on these reading skills. It doesn't have to be the core of the lesson or
Yeah.
even PowerPoints that we pull out.
I think more to, maybe to Russ's point is it's the company itself has developed supporting resources to guide teachers with the SEL part of it. So HMH seems to really have built their niche around, getting SEL into the program. And the next slide over, used alongside text-based discussion, understanding topics such as community diversity and social emotional learning. So it's I don't know if it's just a sticker because it seems like all their supporting documents are written to that. But are you saying, Jake, that that's a higher package that we don't need to purchase and we
I'm
would
saying
be?
that's an element of the program that you don't necessarily need to highlight. As a teacher,
Yep.
and I was a science teacher and a math teacher, within each one of the programs that I had, and both of them that I had were not as robust or had as many different things to pick from as HMH or Wonders. So the number of things that they have within each one of these resources is far what I had access to. But even within the pared down resources that I had, I still was picking and choosing what elements of that resources I was going to use. So for example, if I was teaching a concept on habitats and ecosystems, I could choose different paths to get my students there. I could send them out to websites and have them research that way. I could use the book that I have. I could use the questions that were generated within the text by the company. As an instructor, I had that choice to choose, here are the different resources that I would like to use. Same thing with this is that there's an abundance of resources and paths that you can take, which is the point of the texts. Lots of texts are probably going to be able to fit into one of those 5 buckets of the competencies that you could make a connection to them if you wanted to. It's the how clear are we about the purpose of these lessons and what are they going to be used for? Because in some cases we might
Where's that decision made?
in the understanding by design. Because when you look at so if you were to scroll up and say for, no, too far. I just meant to take the sticker that Chris was talking about. So essential questions, so in understanding by design, we have our transfer goals. The next section, so transfer goals are the goals that are gonna move from any one particular genre to another. So we might say that a transfer goal in kindergarten may have something to do with using our letter sound correspondence. We're going to say that in a much more friendly way so that we can work with students so that they're able to decode words. right underneath that's the essential questions section where we're talking about what makes a community. So that's the essential question that they're gonna focus on throughout this unit. Underneath that is where we're gonna get to the spot where, like, the key acquisition of skills and content, that's highlighted on the right-hand side. That's the scope of what our essential outcomes for this unit are. And we haven't at any point said, you know, the key scope of the lesson here is to identify features of social awareness. The
Well, I
PowerPoints-
would argue that what makes a community is the prompt for that discussion.
And
Without, I
if you
mean, we
take a
didn't
look
say
at the-
SEL, but
yep,
we're prompting a exploratory look into,
which is.
and I'm not necessarily saying that that's good, bad, or, but it is a portion of that.
And if the Wisconsin State Social Studies standards, that's very typical for a kindergarten level, a question that they would be researching is elements of what makes a community.
Sure.
So then you have
But we're
those
talking about
cross, yep, but that's one of the key features of when we talk about making sure that there's a durable understanding for kids. A lot of times we teach things in isolation, and then it just doesn't really stick. But when students are offered the opportunity to learn about something in reading that also transfers to social studies, that makes that learning a little bit more durable for them. And then on top of that, when we talk about the amount of time that teachers are able to allocate towards social studies or science.
But I would argue that that exact thought process is how they're embedding and utilizing SEL throughout this, right? It's to build those multiple touch points.
And what I would say to that is when we take a look at or resources, when we look at the amount of time that teachers are gonna allocate towards any one particular topic or concept, that's what we highlight through our understanding by design process. I would say that you're gonna find elements of character development in Wonders, and you're gonna find it in HMH, and you're gonna find it in Super Kids.
Mm-hmm.
And
as
I
well
think
as-
that's just part of his point, as far as like looking at some of the concepts that the HMH would push as a company, as far as like culturally responsive teaching, you know, biases in teaching, ensure diversity and disrupt patterns of marginalization. I mean, these are all kind of like key buzzwords for parents and people that are trying to, you know, worried about what is being taught in the classrooms. That makes sense, because that's all on their website, the culturally responsive education. You know.
Theoretically, is there something this program does really, really well, rooted in reading, for reading, solely for reading, that another company can emulate or does emulate, where it doesn't come with all the baggage of everything that we've just kind of gone in circles a couple times on? Does it just not exist anymore? Because looking
That
at
there aren't connections to SEL within those curriculums.
just in general, the entire topics of what we're discussing, is there a possibility for us to explore a program that is suited into that without all this extra?
Of which SEL is just one. There's a lot of other extras.
There's more than that.
Like the
I highlighted
cultural
on HMH.
considerations and
Yeah.
there's
And I highlight
So
that
it's
just because
developed.
they highlight it to such a great extent.
no.
So resources, possibly, but it may not develop our students' reading skills as well as the 3 resources that.
So we can't, or there isn't a company that offers a program that teaches reading devoid of those types of topics, or more specifically guided by those type of topics. We can't teach kids how to read without that.
No, you can teach kids how to read without that. I'm just saying
Yeah.
that to look at programs that will say that they don't have any connection to SEL, I'd have to look again at each one of those to see if it's embedded somewhere. My guess is that most of them are gonna make some kind of connection to SEL.
Again, when local state departments come out with initiatives around SEL, the first thing, again, these are vendors, jump and they put SEL, whether
Sure.
it's very directed on explicitly teaching it or it's just the sticker on the front of a their program saying, yep, we have SEL. Just like the word equity. You can't see anything in education anymore that doesn't have the word equity somewhere embedded in it. And the depth of what that definition is goes from
It's contextual to
the
what.
true meaning to we're just putting it on here. There's a conference coming up and it's about equity, but it really isn't, right? So that's the push-pull that us as administrators and locally as a school board have when we think about adopting a resource that will serve the purpose of what we articulate as curriculum and the standards for local control.
Yeah.
And we have to be mindful of that as we develop and then as we adopt whatever we
Well-
put finance behind.
And that's the issue I take with
Yep.
if we have a free market and they want our dollars and we don't want to spend our dollars on that. I understand as one district that doesn't push the needle. But this is a legitimate problem in education that I see, and as a parent coming on the board and why I ran to be on this board is this type of the willingness of the developers to embed these types of philosophies throughout and or even vainly virtue signal their beliefs in it is an issue. And that's why I ask, it's a pointed question for a reason. Is it possible to do it without this? The answer is yes, it is. Does anybody actually provide that anymore? We don't know.
Yeah, the lens in which we looked at all these curriculums were which are the curriculums that are going to best develop our readers. So when I tasked the review team to look at resources, that's the lens in which they looked through them. Is what are the resources that we're going to be able to provide to kids that will increase our students' ability to read. I don't, in terms of that piece of it, I don't think it was even something that our review team even like highlighted as this is the big draw of this company. Almost every one of the ones that they said, here's why we like the company, something along the lines of science of reading, its ability to integrate texts, its balance. The items that I listed for you were the things that our teachers brought up were highlights of it. So they focused on the reading element of the resource.
I fear the answer to your question, Russ, is that these companies would say, well, you don't have to incorporate the PowerPoints. Like, I'm not saying that's right, but I think that's what many of these people will
Sure.
say.
In last summer when we adopted the standards, we adopted them, the matrix side of them, and we explicitly denied the preambles the state put in there, surrounded and just completely drenched in the equity virtue signal that the state felt or feels the need to do. For a reason, we want to focus on education. And like I said, this is just one. I could go into McGraw Hill and pull out. Now I tell you, they didn't package it as easy as this one did, but some of the text that I saw in there, similar to, hey, we're going to discuss, kind of incorporate some science stuff, right, into this reading program as we teach them how to read. And one of the first things I saw was a huge dive into the climate control issue. In the text itself stated things as facts, and I would argue that we're still scientifically looking into all those things. Just to highlight another layer, as Mr. Brown was saying, here we're focused on social emotional learning because it's at the top of every page here. But there's other concerns that we have embedded in these that I just don't see how we can't come up with a source that is focused on the reading side of it and remove all of this the extra issues that these are kind of bringing to the forefront or embedding into them. That's a frustrating side as I sit here as a parent and a board member. I don't necessarily want to see tax dollars going to this type of endeavor or supporting this type of an endeavor. I want the best, strongest, educationally focused reading program we can have. That is the number one goal. If we can't isolate that or focus on that because the publishers are acting in this manner or presenting in this manner, there's an issue there.
So is the will of the committee to go bring this back and provide more context to what the narrative of each program is, and look at if there are quality programs, not just programs that don't say SEL or equity or diversity, but we know don't have results when it comes to reading performance, to try to find those programs to bring forward and delay the process.
Being able to take a look at actually the reading materials that they do offer, so that we can get a overview of all of the type of books that they have in there, to say, okay, so we look at the books and say, 70% of these kind of go towards the SEL thing, and then we'd only really want to look at 30% of them. Is that cost effective? So I think before we just say, go all in, to be actually able to go over the lists of the books that they use, so that you kind of get an idea of what they're offering.
The links for HMH that I provided in Ann McGraw-Hill include all of the texts that are associated with each one of the curriculums.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was able to dive into some of that. Obviously, those would be physical books on our end if we would implement, and or digital, whichever
Either,
way
yeah.
we chose. Yeah, specific to the HMH, as we could self-edit some of the and kind of a la carte, as you said, some of the text that we would be purchasing. It does seem we would be kind of locked into some of the other stuff when it comes to maybe some of the read aloud or the big book.
You could
So
substitute-
I didn't see, and I'm sure it's in there, maybe I just didn't see it. Is there like a category that lists all the big books and all the read alouds?
Yeah.
Or am I just kind of wading through and I'm not sure what's what?
I might be able to get that itemized list from the publisher.
So if I'm hearing correctly, we'll table the approval of the reading pilot program, and we will come back with a list of books from HMH and Wonders related to read aloud and the big books, as well as explore further if the ideal curriculum or resources are
Yeah.
out there that are research-based, that have shown results for
I mean-
student achievement, as well as don't delineate some of the concepts we spoke about this evening.
Well, we talked about cost, and we talked about.
I think, yeah, general understanding of, and I don't need a finite dollar provided, but what are we talking about as far as an implementation budget for this? And you're planning your budget for next year now. We're almost probably complete with that, so I'm sure this is factored into it. So it'd be nice to see that. It would be nice to see some more of the text, more of what Dr. Reuter just explained would be great. Is there anything else we're missing, or potential other companies we could be looking at that the review team could look at that they haven't?
I can put other options back on the table that were eliminated. When we talk about what curriculums were available in terms of being assessed from the standpoint of being correlated to standards, being able to be implemented by teachers.
And I appreciate the work that they're doing, and to your explanation that they focused solely on the educational foundation side of this as to what's going to help us develop the strongest readers we possibly can, right? That's their lens they're looking at this through. And that's the biggest piece of it. But we as a board have to be cognizant of some of the other stuff as well.
So that would be my biggest concern, is that I think the initial list that we brought forward in terms of what are the curriculums that we could look for were the curriculums that were rated highest in terms of their coherence to the standards, as well as their ability to be implemented by teachers in an effective way, and then produce the results that we were looking for.
Mhm.
So from that initial list, we pared them down, but we can go back to the initial list of things that we eliminated to see anything else that we could put back on.
Sure. I just don't, I have a feeling we'll be coming back to the table with the same general conversation. Tracy, do you have anything else?
Not right now. No.
Any idea on, yes, I do. Timeline. Obviously, we're looking to get this running for fall. What kind of timeline do we have? If this comes back to be put back in your hands for some more exploration, where do we start running into? We need decisions made. Was it today or
I
next
think
month
Some of the
prior to July?
I think working with the companies and making sure that they're able to facilitate the training that's involved with running a pilot. Part of that is you almost want to have the full month of August available. In that you have to find a day because there's lots of districts that are in our shoes, so there's trainers that are associated with it.
And I would add that both Mr. Miziak and I have heard this loud and clear in our time in Germantown, that previous pilots, there was not training, adequate training when
Mhm.
pilots were given and teachers were given materials, and then not knowing how to use them appropriately. So that is a
Yeah.
huge factor
Yeah, I mean,
in
that causes the
decision
pilot
making.
math twice, right?
correct,
Yeah.
and which is even more financial burden, as
Yep.
well as our teachers not being equipped to do what we ask them to do every day, which leads to inconsistencies and less parent satisfaction and lower student achievement. So that is a huge factor in decision making. Not that we want to rush you with a decision, but we want to make sure that the people doing the work
It's
are
equally as
equipped.
important.
Yep.
That's why I'm asking about the timeline in general.
There may have to be a shift in terms of when we would start a pilot. Because the training may have to take place at some other point other than August. But the other thing is I'd want the review team to be able to look at the resources in which they did. I think there may be a hesitation with just their overall engagement with a curriculum if I say this is one that we're going to do. Or here are
Mhm.
the three that we're going to
Oh,
do.
absolutely. We have to build buy-in, right? And they're part of the process. They're the end users. Well, they're the end deliverers, right, of the program. Our students are the end users of the program.
So there may be a shift in timeline that would have to occur to make that happen. But to your point, I wouldn't want it to get to the point where we've selected a resource that can't be supported.
So that's the weight of the decision. Kim or Tracy, do you have anything else?
So we can just take a couple more weeks to look this over and
Well, we can table it and bring it back, and we could choose to have we could have another meeting prior to
Whenever we want.
prior to this month's board meeting, right? Because ultimately, if this were to come out of a positive recommendation from us, it would go to the full board anyway. So we were waiting for that date anyways. To dig into the things that we're kind of talking about, is that sufficient? What is that? 2 weeks? Is that
No, it's next week.
or next
is
week?
the board
Is it
Yeah,
next week?
Yeah, Memorial Day.
Oh, yeah, because of Memorial Day weekend.
because we were looking at cost, there's a few factors that we kind of want to take into consideration before we just say, yeah, let's do it.
I think the soonest for full board action would be our June 12th meeting, given what's we've been tasked with in the next. I don't think we could get that done in the next 4 days.
No, I went, and I don't
Yeah.
want that rushed. I was thrown off by the holiday.
So
Yeah.
pretty much by August, I mean, if we can kinda get this all worked out between June and,
So, if the full month of August is for training, there will be, especially if we're not going with one of these three or changing up which ones they are, I'd have to work with whatever that new company was to go through their pilot plan and work with them in terms of being able to get the materials in their hands. The pace at which they can deliver the materials to us would then matter too. So, from me giving them the green light, yes, please ship the materials, to the time that they get to teachers, I'd also want the materials to be in the hands of teachers. Ultimately, I would say I will have to adjust the timeline so that it's not a fall kickoff of the materials, if that has to be, given that I want to make sure that the teachers have them in their hands for a good period of time. Part of the timeline that we currently have is, as soon as I get an approval, I can then greenlight the company to send me the materials, and once they have the materials, I can get those handed to the teachers, and especially the teachers who are on the review committee. I know that they're interested in looking at them so that they're prepared September 1 to make sure that they implement those effectively with kids.
So we talk about the difference of a fall kickoff to a spring
I
kickoff?
wouldn't say that many months.
You would look at moving it into the middle of the semester?
I would try to get the timeline of this to start as close to September as possible, while still having everything in place that we need to have in place. Part of the reason of that is a lot of the curriculums, especially early elementary reading curriculums, they're kind of designed to build upon one another.
Mhm.
So if we kick off in November, some of those, it's not like a plug and play. They're going to expect that kids have had X number of lessons prior to that.
Mhm.
And then our assessment of it won't be authentic.
Yeah. Yeah, because we're stunting the growth on it anyways.
This is going to be a thing where we're going to have to dot our I's, cross our T's. And, you know, to your point with HMH, if honestly, if they didn't put that stamp on there,
There was some great
it
stuff
would
in
really
here.
be
Yeah,
hard.
I saw some
so-
fantastic stuff in here.
So,
I'm not
oh yeah,
discounting
oh
it.
no, no,
Yeah.
no. But my point is that did they put the stamp on there to cross sell their PowerPoints? You know, maybe
100%.
who knows?
Yep.
Because the books that are listed there, I didn't dig into the books, to be honest with you. But if the books are just normal, we would consider normal books. Well,
And it's
That's-
all delivered in the context it's delivered.
yeah,
in,
because
right?
when
Somehow.
you look at just the sheet, you ignore the very top part. You know, I'm no expert or anything, but I'm like, well, this seems
Yeah.
fairly straightforward as far as what the goals or expectations are. So it may end up coming down to that if there's a tremendous challenge trying to find alternatives. I mean, I actually am more concerned about the companies that
Hide
don't
it.
put that sticker on there,
100%.
because that's where you gotta get
Yeah.
out all the equipment and start digging. So
Yep, yeah, and we've had to do that, and we're doing that on other things, and found it that way. I guess as a as the chair, I'm just trying to outweigh the delay factor versus what the potential benefits, what we're asking for further information. What that means, the impact as far as implementation end. Because regardless of what we end up deciding, either way, if we push this too late, it's going to be kind of a false implementation of it, or a handicapped implementation of it. And I don't think that's fair to the teaching staff or the students to do either. But I think in this case, we're gonna have to. That would be I have two other members here that I would have to weigh in on whether we want to table this or not. But I need a motion to entertain it. If we do, I don't want to see this continuously kicked down the road. We're going to have to come to a head to make a decision sooner than later so we can get the correct implementation.
So obviously, knowing the challenges of the scheduling piece for August, if we were to, and you know, however you guys want to do this, if maybe, is it possible to give us a high level status in, I'll say, a week or two, whatever that might be, to basically go, guys, we're having a hard time finding somebody or some company that meets these criteria that you laid out. And in that way, at least we have an idea. We're not making a decision, obviously, because we're not meeting, but at least a status update to go, I have zero confidence, I'm fairly confident, whatever percentage you would want to put on there, or I'm 50-50 and I don't know yet. Because I think an I don't know at some point is also okay. If we get that status and we meet in June and we're able to kind of move quicker on this for the June meetings, we have a chance for the fall. I mean, I'm not going to hold you to it, but we have the chance if we're able to make a final decision by the middle of June.
I think it's still possible.
I'd like to make a motion to table the decision on the fall 2023 reading pilot proposal.
Second.
I have a motion from Tracy to table. I have a second from Kim. Any other discussion? All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Nope. I will move on to item 9. Take
To
a.
make a motion to adjourn.
I
was
second.
Yep, sorry.
We're over.
Apologize. I have a motion to adjourn from Tracy, a second from Kim. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
This meeting is adjourned at 6:55. Thank you for the discussion.